Good afternoon, everybody, on this sweltering afternoon in London right now. Welcome to It Says What? Where JW3 and Lemud come together to bring you unexpected and exciting Jewish content from across the Jewish community every week before Shabbat. I am Joe Hyman, JW3's young adult programmer. And if you haven't seen JW3 online or in person, we are the UK's Jewish Community and Arts Centre. We are partnering to bring you this programme with Lemud, a diverse and inclusive worldwide community of Jewish learning. Our building is closed, but we're very much open and continue to offer a broad range of programmes online. This week, we celebrated Pride with an incredible storytelling event where 7 different people came and shared their stories publicly for the first time. And we just released our celebratory Pride video online, so please check it out and share it with your friends. This series will ask educators, artists, and leaders from across the Jewish community in the UK and abroad to share a surprising piece of Jewish wisdom for our time. To ask your own questions, please comment on our live feed here on Facebook or here on YouTube, and we'll take some towards the end. I am delighted to welcome Kohenet Yael Tischler, a ritual weaver, Jewish educator, and song leader. She is the co-founder of Yelala, a constellation of work that celebrates earth-centered feminist Jewish spirituality and reclaims the practices of our women, femme, and folk ancestors. She holds an MA in writing for young people from Bar University, a BA in English literature from Columbia University, and a BA in Tanakh, Bible, from the Jewish Theological Seminary in America. Welcome, Yael. How are you?
Thanks for asking, Joe. I think the best word to describe how I'm doing today is schwitzy. I think you're quite right about the sweltering weather today, and I was reflecting on how this certainly sort of makes me feel quite close to our ancestors wandering the desert. Like I feel really aligned with them. It's really hot.
Yes, it is very hot, and I mean you can't escape it. There's no air-conditioned JW3 to hide in right now for me. I'm just in my flat, as I'm sure you are too. Yael, before we share the text, I want to ask you a question because I think that some of our viewers would really appreciate understanding and knowing more about you as a person and what it means to be a Kohenet. So if you could just spend a couple of minutes telling us what is a Kohenet, how does one become a Kohenet, and tell us more about why it's meaningful to you.
Great. Thank you so much for asking, because I would love for people to know more about this. So Kohenet just means priestess in Hebrew. We kind of translate that as Hebrew priestess. And basically what it means is that I studied for 3 years at the Kohenet Hebrew Priestess Institute, which is based in the United States. And the body of knowledge that we look at in this clergy training program is really one that is often not celebrated in mainstream Jewish spaces. We are people of the book, and that is beautiful. Like we have survived for so long because of the written word, because of our texts. And this became especially important when we kind of experienced the trauma as a people from being divorced from land. We were a land-based people. We lost the temple. We lost our status as being an independent nation within the land of Israel, became a diasporic people. And for a lot of cultures who experience this kind of trauma of being divorced from land, divorced from sacred space, divorced from ritual practice, what happens is that gets lost and that gets erased. But because of the written word, we were really able to reinvent Judaism so that it could survive, so that it could be portable, so that it could be taken with us. And that is sort of the beauty of our written tradition. The other side of that is when you start writing things down, it creates all kinds of sort of inability to access. If you're not someone who is in the room when things are being written down, if you're not male, for example, or if you're not literate for whatever other reason, maybe it's class, maybe it's other kind of marginalized identities, your stories don't get told and your practices don't get recorded. And what's important to realize, and what we really celebrate in Kohenet, is as the rabbis were kind of creating rabbinic Judaism, all along, all through thousands and thousands of years of commentary, right? Women were in the other room and they were doing their own thing. And so were the people we call the folk, sort of people who weren't necessarily able to take time to study, to devote their lives to the written word. And Kohenet is about saying those things are Jewish too. Like the things that my grandmother and my great-grandmother and my great-great-great-great-great-grandmother did, those things are also Jewish and also worthy of celebration. Female Jewish leadership goes way, way back into the ancient world, and that's some of what we will discuss today. And also there have always been practices that have not just been about what we read in our books, but also kind of cultivating relationship with land, whether it's the land, the ancient land, when we speak about kind of our ancestral home, or the land where we find ourselves now, which I think is finding a lot of resonance with contemporary Jews who feel like actually we are people of diaspora. And what we want to do is be using our Jewish faith to cultivate relationship to land. So the Kohenet Institute focuses on sort of women's bodies of knowledge, femme bodies of knowledge, earth-based bodies of knowledge, folk-based bodies of knowledge, to bring these back, to make them ritual tools for contemporary Jews to really connect in a multitude of different ways to their Jewish faith and practice and ancestry.
Thank you for such a beautiful explanation of what a Kohenet is and the importance of it. It's clear that it sounds vital to unearthing stories that have not been written down, and centering kind of the earth and our appreciation for the earth in kind of relationship with our Judaism and relationship with God. And I think that's really interesting in this context. You know, when we're in our homes, and also often people are, if they're able to, appreciating nature in a different way. But I could get carried away in this the whole day. But please tell us, what is your text that makes you say, it says what?
Okay, so my text is Exodus 38:8, and if you're looking at any translation of this verse, you might be saying what to the fact that it's making me say what, because I think this is, at first glance, it looks like this is kind of a pretty mundane verse. And I'll read it for you in Hebrew, and then I'll give you kind of a preliminary translation, which is, Vayas et hakior nechoshet, ve'et kano nechoshet, v'marot hatzovot asher tzavu petach ohel moed. So he is referring to Bezalel, who is basically the architect / artist who is being called upon to create the Mishkan, the portable desert sanctuary that our ancestors used when they were kind of doing their 40-year-long desert wandering after the exodus from Egypt before reaching the promised land. So he made the laver, the washing basin, out of copper, and his stand of copper from the mirrors of the tzovot, I'm not going to yet translate that, who tzovad, at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So Joe, this is actually a verse that transformed my life. And part of that is this incredible reading. I learned this reading from Rav Kohenet Rabbi Jill Hammer, who's co-founder of the Kohenet Institute. And I think it's actually critical to how we understand the role of women in the ancient world. And really this has to do with translation, because translation can kind of make things show up or it can erase things. And I think a lot of the translations of this verse sort of kind of dismiss these tzovot who are tzovaing as the serving women or something similar. They're the serving women who are performing tasks in front of the Mishkan, whatever. So I think in order to experience how radical this text is, we need to look a bit closer. So tzovot, the Hebrew root is tsadi vet aleph, and it's a feminine plural noun. We know that from the ut ending. So we have a feminine plural noun with this shoresh, with this root. And this usually refers to priestly or national service. So often it's actually used in a military context. This root is used to refer to the men who fight the Midianites. In Numbers 31, in Isaiah, it's sort of talking about foreign warriors harassing the people of Israel. In modern Hebrew, some people might have heard the word sava. It's the same root as well, which means army. So there's actually this wonderful suggestion, which is not necessarily what I think, but I think is very cool, that maybe we're talking about women warriors, which is certainly linguistically a possibility. But I think we need to go even a little bit further to get to the actual meaning of this, which is this is also the root that is often translated as hosts, which sort of connotes, we're connoting many. There's lots and lots of people doing something sacred. You might have heard the term for God, Adonai Tzbaot, the Lord of hosts. That's the same root. And in that case, it's kind of speaking about the hosts of angels who are with God. Or in the Kiddush, we say, Vayachulu hashamayim v'haaretz b'chol tzva'am, right? That is sort of talking about the earth being completed in all her array. So there's that kind of multitude sense again. So we've got many of something that is female, that is sort of duty to whatever the group is. But I think the most important use of this root is actually in reference to the priestly cults. And I'll just take a moment to say, sort of when I talk about ancient Israelite cults, I'm not talking about like, ooh, bad cults that like try and brainwash you. I'm talking about kind of the way that our religion functioned in the ancient world. And this is the root that is used to describe the tasks of the priests in the Mishkan, the male priests. So in Numbers 3, we get a census of the various Levite clans. The Levites were the priestly class, and all the things that they are going to do. And that this is the root that describes their actions in the Mishkan. So it seems like actually what we have is a group of women, a host of women, if you will, working in an official capacity in the ancient Israelite cults. We're using the same terminology for them as we are for priests and warriors. Like, this isn't just like the women who are kind of coming around to clean things up. This feels like an instance of priestesses, which to me is particularly exciting, because Kohenet, as we mentioned, is all about kind of reclaiming old stories, reclaiming kind of these narratives that have often been erased by the written word or by the kind of evil magic of translation. Kind of that can totally get rid of stuff that is super radical like this. And this isn't the only appearance of the tzovot. We do get them again. They are mentioned in 1 Samuel. And this is in kind of a negative context. The sons of the priest Eli get in trouble because they're having sex with the tzovot who are serving in the shrine of Shiloh. So again, we have this group of professional women doing service in the ancient cult, but it's not making them look particularly good, and it's not making the sons of Eli look particularly good. But they are present, they are there, and it's important to note that actually, like, our sacred text is really uncomfortable with priestesses. We are kind of, our national story is the development of monotheism, which is basically about the development of kind of mostly kind of not gendered, but mostly male singular deity served by male people. And so kind of these instances of priestesses that we often get in our texts are not always so positive. What is an interesting observation is that the association with the tzovot and sexuality could be deliberate. Like, we do know that there was sacred sexuality in the ancient world. So kind of having kind of professional sex workers who were kind of facilitating relationship with the divine through sexual acts. We don't know if this is what the tzovot were doing, especially since kind of there's often a conflation in the Hebrew Bible between kind of sort of, is it a priestess or is it a sex worker? Because the Hebrew Bible doesn't like priestesses. So it might just be a way of saying like, oh, well, they're all just sex workers, as opposed to acknowledging like, maybe these are just priestesses, and I feel really uncomfortable with that. But what we do know about them is sort of, they seem to be providing some kind of doorway function. And there are doorway priests in our tradition. They're called Shomrei Hasaf. So it's possible that the tzovot functioned in this way as kind of guardians of sacred space, doing their service outside of the temple and kind of facilitating people's entry into sacred space. I want to draw attention to the mirrors before we go into our Q&A, because I think that is actually another part of our puzzle here in terms of so what might they have been doing? And the mirrors are pretty key. So Nachmanides, who's a medieval commentator, has an interesting interpretation of the Tzovot. He says, among the Israelites were certain women dedicated to God's service who distanced themselves from worldly desire. They donated their mirrors to the tabernacle, for they had no further use for beauty. So he's kind of looking at the world that he's in and saying, well, maybe they were like nuns. And they just didn't need these mirrors, because what they were doing was kind of actually rejecting their sexuality. So it's sort of an opposite of what's being suggested in Samuel. And also feels like a very male reading to me. But he's picking up on these mirrors. So here's what I have to say about those mirrors and what they were. So mirrors are definitely a priestess tool. We have instances of Kazakh priestesses being buried with bronze mirrors, of priestesses in the Cycladic Islands who are being buried with obsidian mirrors. We have Hathor's priestesses in ancient Egypt who used mirrors to create a trance state during dance, as well as for prophecy. So these mirrors are not, they're kind of, they are a tool, right? We're using these mirrors as a way of doing divination, as a way of doing prophecy, as a way of facilitating spiritual experience. And they're very much associated, at least in terms of what archaeology has unveiled, with kind of official working priestesses. And so it's very interesting that we have these doorway priestesses with mirrors, because mirrors are a kind of doorway. They're, in our tradition, they're kind of a doorway to the spirit world. And so what I think we have in the case of the Tzovot is kind of both literal and metaphorical doorway priestesses who were there, who were present in the ancient Israelite cult, who were facilitating people's entry into the sacred space, both in terms of their little acts, but also in terms of the spiritual acts. So that's what I have to say about the Tzovot to introduce them, and I'm curious what your questions are, Joe.
Yael, thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, please post them on Facebook or YouTube now. But I'm going to just throw in that this is a text that really does make you say, you know, it says what. And I think the whole point of this project is to unearth, to uncover texts that we may have seen before or may have not seen before, and read them in a way that says, you know, actually you're missing something. You're looking at it and you're focusing on it in a way that you have done for the past 20 years. Look at it this way. When you look at it that way, it makes you include someone that you stopped including beforehand, or hear something that you didn't hear before. And I think that's such a amazing thing. And I think it's what oral Torah, what that process of oral Torah is all about. But I want to ask about how you feel about this often being brought in the context of negativity, and how you reclaim the priestesses in the context of something positive that you embrace and move forward with Kohenet and with this kind of this focus on the spirituality of women in the Bible. How do you push past that and that feeling of negativity? Because I think it takes something from you when one reads that the negativity, and I want to see, you know, for the audience, how you move past that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and is a lot of the work that we do in Kohenet that I feel like I've almost been doing my whole life. I think if you're part of any marginalized group, right, there's always this dealing with the fact that the wider world doesn't automatically tell your story, and when it does, it's probably not a story that's nourishing to you, a story that you want to hear, and that's really real. And I think part of the process of working with these texts is honoring that pain, like honoring that something was taken from us, like that when we see these texts, we know that we were there. Like we know that we were there and we were doing things, like we weren't just in the kitchen the whole time. It actually like really pains me when people say to me like, oh, women were leaders in the ancient world. Like, weren't you just all in the kitchen? And like, that really hurts. And also this sort of conflation of like priestessing with sexuality in a way that really is demeaning to both the idea of being a priestess and to sex itself. And I think the way that I tend to work this with these texts is sort of make space for the pain, because that kind of ancient pain of stories not being told kind of reflects a contemporary pain of like, we still live in patriarchy. Like, we still live in a world that's sex negative for the most part. Like, we still live in a world where people are being marginalized for a variety of reasons, whether it's their sexual orientation, how they look, what their gender identity is. Like, there's so many ways in which kind of our absence from myth is reflected in the present, and the stories that are being told about us in the present. But I think that makes the work all that much more important, because for me, the whole point of myth, the whole point of story, is to help us live our lives now, to help us kind of have the stories that we need to nourish us so that we can actually live as full, healthy people in this world, and so that we can actually work together to dismantle oppressive structures. I think it's Rebecca Solnit who says that sort of storytelling is basically a revolutionary process. So much of change is about kind of breaking and remaking stories. And I think it's that sense of breaking and remaking stories that I take when I approach a text like this or any other text about women in the ancient world, is sort of acknowledge the pain, but okay, like, what is this revealing actually? Like, what is this saying to us? How would I tell this story? And I think this is most clearly reflected in the story of Sheila, who is Jephthah's daughter, who I've done a lot of work with. The original story, for those of you who don't know, her story is in Judges, is about a girl who is sacrificed by her father, basically because he makes a really stupid vow. He says that if he wins a battle, then he'll sacrifice the first thing that comes out of the door to greet him. It's obviously his daughter. I'm sure people have heard many different variations of this story. And then he says, oh, I'm really sad. It's all your fault. I have to sacrifice you. And then she says, oh, yeah, that's right, Dad. You definitely do have to kill me. But before that, I'd like to go into the mountains and do this wailing ritual with my sisters, and then I'll come back and you can sacrifice me. And that's what happens. She goes into the mountains. She has a wailing ritual with her sisters that we don't know that much about. And then she comes back and she is sacrificed. And Jephthah, her father, Yiftach, fulfills his vow. And sort of a first reading of this text, you definitely feel that pain of like, whoa, like, smash the patriarchy, you guys. Like, what is this story where no angel comes to rescue this girl, where the text basically seems to be upholding this human sacrifice of a woman because she's not important enough to be sacrificed, like to be rescued by an angel. And is basically, she seems to be consenting to this. She seems to think that this oppression is okay. But then kind of you look a little deeper and you see, well, but what was she doing with her sisters? Like, what were all those women doing together in this wailing ritual? Like, you start imagining into that. You start looking at kind of, where do we see wailing rituals in the ancient world? And often, so what I looked at when I was looking at this story is like, ritual weeping is actually usually about calling back a dying god who has gone to the underworld, or dying goddess. Like there's rituals around Persephone in ancient Greece, who is mourned by her mother Demeter, and that kind of causes her to come back with the spring. We have similar stuff with the story of Inanna and Dumuzi. And that made me start to think and imagine, like, if that's what this is, could we tell a different story about this? Like, is there something in the communal grieving that they're doing together that is going to become, and it actually says like that this became a ritual for the daughters of Israel to do for 4 days out of every year. So there's this ritual that we don't know that much about that apparently was happening and was really common, where all these women are getting together to weep. Like, is it possible to say, like, actually this story is about solidarity between women, and is about this ritual that maybe we've lost and maybe has some space here. Like, maybe we need contemporary rituals, just like our ancestresses of old sort of gathered together to make weeping ritual together. Do we need a place to safely weep together? And is there a way where we could tell this story differently, where Sheila, the daughter of Yiftach, she's given the name Sheila in Midrash. It's not in the text itself. Where actually she does end up being more powerful. And I think Midrash is a powerful tool coupled with sort of research. And that's kind of what I tend to do, is I tend to go to the research first. So what can we find out about these women of the ancient world, looking at archaeology, looking at anthropology, what can we piece together? And at that point, like when you get to what we do know, kind of moving past into the realm of imagination. And Midrash is just such an important Jewish tool that our rabbis have given us, the ability to tell stories where our texts don't have the stories yet, to fill in the blanks, and to begin to tell stories, to make myths that are actually empowering to us, that serve us, that reflect our pain, that give us the strength to go on. And that tends to be how I work with these texts. You are muted, Joe.
I am muted. That's really, really wonderful and interesting to me. The idea of kind of, rereading narratives, and they're so powerful that they guide everything that we do, the narratives that we learn as children, the narratives that we learn in religious school. If we've kind of been in that space, it really, really affects how we see text. And I see that, and I completely relate to what you're saying. That piece about Yiftach is really interesting. About finding those spaces that have rituals, and building from there is really important. I've got one question from the audience, and then I want to ask you, and I'm going to throw in these two at the same time, and you can answer them in whatever order you prefer. The first question is from me, and I ask this to everybody, but what do you think this text has to say to us in lockdown? It may not have anything to say about lockdown. Lockdown, it doesn't need to be about everything, but I think it might. And the other question is, if these Sovot were guarding the entryway, we could describe their role as facilitators rather than actors in the cult. And still today, traditionally observant Jews ascribe to women the role of facilitators, in charge of child rearing and helping their husbands fulfill mitzvot. Is that an accurate description of the Sovot? And if it was, is their role so radical?
What a great question. So I'm going to start with this question, and then I'm going to move to yours. So I think that's an excellent observation, because even as we look at these Sovots and we try to imagine what they were, and by the way, there's no way to say 100% what they were or who they did, but my imagination is certainly going along the same lines as you. Is like, this seems to be a facilitative role. I do think there's something actually that's quite active about facilitation, and I think that is the issue with patriarchal structures, is that facilitation gets dismissed as, because it's kind of more of a girl thing, more of a women's act, that it's actually less than. Sort of the role of enabling, the role of midwifing, the role of facilitating is somehow less powerful than being an actor yourself. And I actually think we need to change that about our society as a whole. Like, we need to be rethinking how we envision power. Because some of the times I've felt most in my power actually are when I've been kind of creating ritual that facilitates something for somebody else. And maybe it's actually, the issue is really kind of what we think of as power, what we think of as powerful. And certainly, like, when we go back and try and find ancient Israelite women's leadership roles, we find a lot of different kinds. But we're not dealing with an egalitarian society the way that we would envision it. We are dealing with a society that had roles for women, that had women who were working professionally. There are lots of different roles for different types of priestesses in the ancient world, all over. And sort of the Hebrew Bible certainly reflects that in terms of talking about nefiot, prophetesses, chachamot, wise women. These are all really important archetypes, but they are different than the roles that males seem to be associated with a few exceptions. Like, I think Deborah, who is a prophetess and a judge, very much steps into a role that is sort of more archetypally male, kind of as a military leader, right? So you do get some people who are kind of breaking apart that archetypal thing. but yeah, my response would be, yeah, it is painful to acknowledge that maybe we're not talking about egalitarianism for sure in the ancient worlds. But I think it is radical to me to be saying we were there, we were actively doing things, and these things that we were doing were important. It's like sort of reclaiming the archetype of mother, reclaiming the archetype of midwife. Like these were seriously powerful ways in which women did and continue to be actors in community. And I think we also benefit when we start seeing that those are ways that men can be powerful too. When the archetype becomes not mother, but parent, loving parent, nourishing parent, when men are able to step into those female archetypes, or sort of men as midwives who are able to facilitate people's experiences, like let us kind of claim these things that are archetypally feminine for absolutely everyone, and let's blur those boundaries.
I think that you may have answered how it's relevant to lockdown in that question, because that idea that we become parent, or we change and think about the role of facilitator in the home feels so relevant, and I would love just like to hear one line about that, because I think it's such an important message to hear, and I think I really relate to that idea of, yeah, facilitator is important. It is vital. You can feel like it's not. I guess I'm biased because I facilitate a lot of things.
Yeah.
But give me a line about what this has to say to people who are in their homes, maybe balancing those gender roles very, very kind of difficultly. What does this text have to say about that?
Yeah. Well, I think what we often do, what we're doing in this is kind of drawing out the importance of feminine space. And I think, while not wanting to make any essentialist statements, I think the home historically has been an archetypally feminine space, domestic space. And now we're all there, right? Now we are all in the space of the home, where for like millennia, women have been learning how to kind of claim that space, make it sacred, make ritual in the home. And I think we are in a really like amazing point in history in which everyone's in the home now. Everyone gets to explore how ritual is made in domestic space, how power is found in the domestic space, how facilitating the home is everyone's responsibility. And I think that is a really powerful, egalitarian magic of everyone being in this space that used to be sort of just for women. Now it's something that everyone is learning to be in and learning to be powerful in.
Thank you. That idea that not only through changing narrative do we change how we feel about ourselves and how included people are in society, but also through that, that experience. People are now experiencing that, and I think it also relates to what you were talking about in terms of an earth focused kind of embodied ritualistic practice, because that experience really also sticks in a way that sometimes narrative lacks. It's up here in the head, but in the body, and I'm so glad that we've had you today. This is definitely a text that makes me say, it says what? Thank you so much, Yael. And to our audience, thank you for listening. Please go and have some water, cool down, have an ice lolly or something, but wishing you a really, really wonderful Shabbat. Check out JW3's upcoming events this week. We've got a full schedule, and see us for It Says What next week with Rabbi Adam Zagoria Moffat. Have a good Shabbat.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone.